Good morning. All right. This one, we're going to go over my BIG-IP AS3 Common declaration, the reason I place things in there, and how that is a reusable item across my different BIG-IP, let's say, services. In this case, if you're unfamiliar with AS3, then you're probably on the wrong video. But if you are familiar with AS3, you've likely seen the common tenant at least pop up a few times. And if you've ever seen something like the Journeys tool, which takes non-AS3 configuration and moves it towards an AS3, let's say, format, you'll really notice it. Or if you've been looking at possibly BIG-IP Next, which does also take some AS3 configuration. All right, so to start off, we're going to do some review of what AS3 Common is. So if you're looking at the AS3 documentation, under the ADC object, right, there's this common, and there's a special call out for a special tenant that holds objects other tenants can share. And I think that's important because when you're looking at building reusable objects, you don't want to create them over and over again. Like I'm going to sneeze. When I create things like iRules or even certain pools, resources, traffic policies, all of those things potentially could be a reusable object. And I don't want to have to create them and create that technical debt if I do it in each one of my services. So I use this thing called the common shared declaration, right? And in there, it's actually a subfolder of common. So if you have resources that already live in common, that's fine. But as soon as you start building out your common shared, that becomes your common declaration for just the shared folder. So you can continue to have your things in common and also your things in common shared if you're looking for a migration strategy. I mentioned this just a little bit ago, but this is the Journeys tool. Depending on how you use it, the full migration will actually spit out a common shared declaration just one-for-one swap. If you do the application service migration, it'll actually move it into a tenant style, so partitions. Again, if you're unfamiliar with partitions, common, shared, all of those are logical grouping of configuration inside a BIG-IP, and you are going to have to adopt those types of situations for at least BIG-IP right now for how I actually create and manage those styles of solutions. So I'm going to look at my common shared things I place in there. We're going to go through that, and then I'm going to show you what it looks like in the BIG-IP after it's up and running. So within the lab, on the left-hand side under BIG-IP, let's just start at the top so we can see the flow. So BIG-IP, I do it as an Ansible job. I could definitely do this as Terraform too, but I like it as Ansible because it's, for me, part of the bootstrapping. And I'm using Ansible for more of my bootstrapping jobs than I am Terraform. So under Ansible, I've got a few other ones, but we'll go through those at a later date. I've got this F5 automation tool chain. Now, when I go look at how it runs, so let's say AS3 tasks and main, the first part of this particular one is it's going to wait for the BIG-IP to be ready. And if the BIG-IP is ready, then great, it moves on. Then I'm going to get a token to make sure that I'm actually allowed to talk to it, right? I'm going to validate that AS3 is running. In my logic, I want to make sure that the thing is up and that AS3 is also available before I ever try to send a declaration to it. Otherwise, it's just wasted time. So I make sure AS3 is ready, and then I prepare my declaration. So in this case, I'm going to go grab that file. I'm going to base name it. I'm going to look for the name, and I'm going to convert it to something that's JSON, right? In this case, I'm only templating one part of the declaration, and I'll show you that when I get there. But this style would allow me to do many, many things, right? Like maybe I want to templatize, I don't know, the iRole or more contents of the declaration. I could definitely do that. So I've set myself up to be ready instead of just having a plain declaration that I'm sending. And that is one of the reasons why I like this instead of using the AS3 module. So then I'm going to create or update the declaration. So now I'm going to actually send it in its creator update because AS3 is a whole manifest, right? Like anything that I send in there, it's going to be reflective of that. So I'm either going to create it or I'm going to update it. So I'm going to send that in. Notice the app services declare endpoint. And then if I wanted to, I'm going to, right here, I'm going to log out and kill my token. But I've also got some stuff for the reverse. So say I want to remove it, right? Remove the declaration. I have this flipped for my when state so that it's either present or absent, and that way I can pull or push the declaration. Now, these are common level items, so if I pull that declaration out, I'm going to probably break a bunch of stuff, and because of the linkage, BIG-IP won't let me do that anyway. So, all right, so here's how it flows. We'll go look at the file. So the file location, we'll go back to that Ansible configuration, right? Actually, I want to go to configuration, F5 automation toolchain. I have one for telemetry streaming and I have one for AS3. And you can see this is AS3 Common. That's the only AS3 declaration I use in this playbook. So a quick review of the template that I'm using. And you can see here's an Ansible template object, and that's based on the action. So I could either do the reverse present absent like I saw and showed in the Ansible part, or I could template in the action, which there are a few different actions. One of them is deploy, one of them is destroy or delete. And then there's another one called dry run. And I don't particularly use it because if I fail the declaration, I actually want to know that it's just failing. But there is a dry run action. And what that will do is tell AS3 to try and do it, right? But don't make any changes. So what would happen if I did this, and then I can do the trace and see what all the changes were before it goes in. So I could actually put that in my pipeline too and say, hey, do this dry run. If it comes back functional, then do the actual push, right? So it gives me one more step. I can see the validation, or you could do some creative things like do the dry run in Ansible Tower and then have an approval process that says, okay, yes, this looks like it worked. Somebody go press the button. So there is some additional things that you can do under the actions, which is why I leave it as a template. A little bit farther below, we're going to go through my common items. Now, I try really hard to explain this to other environments that you shouldn't be putting everything in here. You should only be putting in here things that are completely reusable. iRules, traffic policies, possibly certs, right? What else would be in there? Maybe a shared pool, right? A discovery style pool. Those types of things are reusable and they end up in common shared. If you're doing an application, a GSLB object, an LTM object, right? Those style of solutions, they belong in their own declaration and they belong in their own tenant. So this would not be for those, like my applications live someplace else, but those applications may use these things. That way I could put this maintenance iRule, right? Or a health check. And then if I wanted to, I could reference it. And in the event many of those applications are using it, I can just make one change to this declaration, then all of them are affected. So it gives me a lower threshold on tech debt. So some things to be aware of. A lot of the stuff at the top, common, shared, that's where it's going. So it's going in the common tenant or the common partition under the shared folder. So this doesn't affect things in common like I described earlier. Then below that, I've got some iRules. And iRules are super powerful. Hopefully you already know what those things do. But many of these do different things as I've found needs for them, right? Across different environments and things like that. However, iRule storage in a declaration can be kind of messy because there are return characters. You can't have spaces. So you have to format them really particularly. So I use the base 64 encoded mechanism. So I create my iRule like normal, I base 64 encode it, and then I just tell AS3 that, hey, this is base 64 encoded. You need to decode it when it goes into the BIG-IP. So I got iRules. That makes total sense. Then I get down into stuff for telemetry streaming. And we'll go over telemetry streaming in a future video for how I have mine set up. But telemetry streaming does require some BIG-IP configuration objects to exist in the data plane. And I want that on all of my BIG-IPs. So any BIG-IP that's created has the same, let's say, setup for telemetry streaming. It looks at itself, it then sends configuration off. So what you're seeing here is the telemetry streaming one. So telemetry streaming, pool, the high-speed logging, format publisher. Again, all of this is something that would be a standard on all of my BIG-IPs, everyone that's created. So this becomes a reusable object. Then I get down into security logging. So maybe I want to have events for WAF or events for AFM. I got to have those things built in here too. Same setup, right? So security logging profile, I get a little bit farther down because I also demo GSLB or BIG-IP DNS or BIG-IP GTM. Depending on what the object is, will it go in the common shared or will it go in its own partition? These things I feel like are reusable objects. So these would be a GSLB monitor, right? I may want to use that for many services. And as we all know, you should have your own monitor created off of the default, so that way you don't affect default as somebody accidentally chooses it. So here's some default monitors. This particular BIG-IP is also a GSLB server, so I have to put that in there, right? I've got some generic servers for lookups. I've got some virtual servers for those. So these are my common level items that end up in here. It's going to be GSLB, let's say, data center level objects, iRules. You saw some logging profiles for telemetry streaming, and it ends there. I don't want to do things that are application specific beyond that. So declaration location, you're welcome to steal it, right? Come in and see what it looks like. The iRules that are in here, what I just want to show is what it looks like at the end. So say this proxy protocol iRule that was written by a great colleague, Chad. If he ever sees this, thanks for writing it. So as it's going in here, this is the declaration, but it's all in base 64. So when I come and look at my actual objects inside my BIG-IP, if I go look for those iRules, and let's switch back to the common partition, now I've got that proxy protocol iRule, but you can see the location. It's common shared, and it shows up in BIG-IP in this particular one as this format. So I don't have to worry about the spacing, the return characters, right? Any of those things if I use the base 64 encoded. So we'll go over other deployment styles and solutions later on in different videos, but this is my common. And then I use AS3, fast templates, all of those things for applications as well. But this is the setup for what it looks like for a common and commonly reusable items. As always, I wish everybody good luck. Have a great time.